Welcome to Have It Out with Galloway. Before proceeding with the show, it would be remiss of me not to mark the incredible tragedy that occurred in Iran near the Azerbaijan border, the helicopter disaster which has robbed Iran and its people, its faithful people, of their president Ibrahim Raisi and their foreign minister and other members of their distinguished entourage. A disaster for their families, a disaster for all the people of Iran. All of the deceased served their country faithfully and will be greatly missed, not just in Iran itself, but on the international level. May God bring solace to those they leave behind, and may Iran find its way quickly and smoothly to a new president, a new foreign minister, and a continuation of their resistance and their support for resistance to imperialist plans and plots all over the world. Now, it was a terrible day in Iran, but it was a very good day in Britain and in Brussels this day. First of all, in London, the world-renowned publisher, whistleblower, journalist Julian Assange, the world's #1 political prisoner, won his court case and now has effectively blocked any possibility that he will be extradited to the United States to face a hanging jury in Virginia and 175 years in a supermax penitentiary, disappearing from the world's view and the world's earshot forevermore. Julian Assange has paid a very high price for telling the truth about what the Western rulers were doing in our name, on our dime, and with our authority. Julian Assange has never once been found to have published a single word that had to be retracted. Would that other editors, other publishers could say the same. Julian Assange exposed the criminals, and the criminals have put him behind bars. Nowadays, in the dungeon called Belmarsh, built for terrorists and mass murderers, where this gentle writer and publisher has languished for more than 5 years. They hope to have him on a plane to the United States today. But thanks to the appeal bench in the High Court in London and the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of Assange campaigners all over the world, this has been stopped in its tracks. And Joe Biden, you've got enough trouble in your upcoming presidential election in November. If you'll take a word of advice from me, you'll drop the charges against Julian Assange right now and set him free to be with his young family. Big events in Brussels also. I've just come from the British Parliament, where a very great effort was being made from the government benches and implicitly from the front bench of the so-called opposition. Opposition, there is none to the Israeli genocidal campaign in Gaza. One or two members of Parliament, like me, like the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, now effectively exiled out of the Parliament, out of the Labour Party at least. Us notwithstanding, no one was standing to condemn the genocidal crimes of Benjamin Netanyahu and his army chief of staff, his defense minister. The decision by the British King's Council, Mr. Khan, KC, to issue arrest warrants for the Prime Minister of so-called democratic Israel is one of the most important landmarks of recent years. The Israeli Prime Minister and his Defense Minister have both been charged by the Chief Prosecutor with crimes against humanity, with war crimes, and specifically the war crime of deliberately targeting individual civilian people, families who've been wiped out absolutely remorselessly for 7 months and have been subjected to a deliberately pre-planned starvation and withdrawal of water, electricity, and all forms of energy, all forms of power, which the Chief Prosecutor alleges is tantamount to the genocidal crime of crimes against humanity. It's going to be very difficult now, despite the bluster in the British Parliament, for business as usual to be continued with the murderous apartheid regime in Tel Aviv. So great big issues rolling out, unfolding all around us. You've come to the right place to discuss them. It's Have It Out with Galloway. Well, first of all, many people think that the United States died in November of 1963 in the nightmare on Elm Street, when in broad daylight, in full public view, their popular president was assassinated in the streets of Dallas, Texas. I was 9 years old at the time. I could recount then, at the age of 9, virtually the entire inauguration address of President Kennedy. His picture was on our wall. Coming, as I do, from an Irish Catholic background, the elevation, the election against all the odds of an Irish Catholic president was of enormous significance. Indeed, I've just come from the Vatican a couple of days ago, and on sale in the shops of the Vatican are the very same picture I had on my wall at the age of 9. My father came out to tell me I was playing football in the street, that the president had been murdered in plain sight, and that the television cameras had confirmed his demise. It was, I believe, the day that America died as well. Prior to that, in West Side Story, it was perfectly plausible for the songwriters to write the lyrics, "I want to be an American." Everybody at that time wanted to be an American. Jack Kennedy and his Camelot court of supposed nobility, the nobility was a trifle overblown, it turned out. But nonetheless, America seemed to stand for something back then. And with the demise of the president, I believe that the demise of America's moral authority began to drain away. Even as a young boy, I knew that it could not be true that the fatal shots had been fired by a single patsy who was then himself assassinated in broad daylight. In real time, we watched it on television. I knew there must be more to it than that. In the decades since, it has become abundantly clear that Jack Kennedy was murdered by his own, that he fell victim to a conspiracy involving many people, and many of them powerful people indeed. Jim DiEugenio is a renowned author, screenwriter, and JFK assassination expert. He co-authored the JFK assassination chokeholds and authored JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass. and he contributed mightily to 3 Oliver Stone documentaries, including JFK Revisited. To this day, he actively advocates for releasing classified documents on the JFK case, and I am certainly pleased to meet him. Jim, thanks for joining us. I don't know if you heard the comments I made at the beginning, but the notion that America died with Jack Kennedy in 1963 in Dallas is one that I have long felt. What's your take on that?
Well, there's a lot of people who agree with you on that, George, and that would include Bob Dylan, who made that great song, Murder Most Foul.
It
All right.
was, I
There's a
think,
lot of
Dylan's
things
greatest
that,
song, by the way, Jim, and I'm something of an expert myself on Dylan, but I think his Murder Most Foul as an elegy to America through the prism of the slaying of the president, well, it stirred something in me. How about you?
yeah, I think it's a terrific song. You're exactly right. It is an elegy to a world gone by, on the day that JFK died. Now, your opening about how things changed and how it was a lost era is absolutely correct in that there were so many alterations to Kennedy's foreign policy by first Johnson and then Nixon that you really Kennedy's foreign policy was all but destroyed in just a matter of a couple of years. See, Kennedy, because he was Irish, he had an intense sympathy for the whole colonial structure of France and Britain. All right. And he didn't like it. He didn't like it at all. All right. And in 1957, he made a great speech on the floor of the Senate attacking Eisenhower, Dulles, and Nixon for taking sides with France in a civil war in Algeria. That speech, nobody really knew who Kennedy was at that time. But that speech, he had a clipping office. There were 140 editorials and columns writing about that speech. It was 2-1 against him. All right, who is this uppity Irish guy from telling everybody that they're wrong about this? All right, and so he calls up his father and he says, "Did I make a mistake on this?" And Joe Kennedy says, "You don't know how lucky you are. This is only going to get worse. And a year from now, people are going to look back at you like you were a prophet." And George, that's exactly what happened. 8 months later, Kennedy was on the cover of Time magazine, and the inside story was called Man Out Front. And he now became the leader of an alternative foreign policy in the Democratic Party. And then he went ahead, once he was elected, all right, to office, he almost from day one, he began changing the Dulles foreign policy in the United States in places like Congo, for example, in Africa, and in places like Vietnam, all right, and also in Indonesia, okay, and also the Middle East, which you were talking about earlier. Kennedy's policies changed everything that had happened. And the architect of those, of course, was a guy named John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State for about 7 or 8 years. And Kennedy did not like John Foster Dulles very much at all.
And he earned the enmity of Dulles, which may actually have been at least the lighting of the trail of gunpowder, which led to Kennedy's murder, don't you think?
Well, John Foster Dulles' brother was Allen Dulles. That's the guy you're referring to. Foster Dulles was head of the State Department. Allen Dulles was the director of the CIA. And in JFK Revisited, which you've probably seen, we try and indicate that very likely Allen Dulles was at the very least in on, the conspiracy to kill JFK. And there's a lot of reasons for that. All right. To name just one, there's indications that Dulles was at CIA headquarters on the day, even though he was not CIA director anymore, on the day of Kennedy's assassination.
It's fascinating. Let's unpick some of those foreign policies that Kennedy pioneered and which were all trashed. Vietnam is an obvious one. Kennedy's attempt to keep American involvement in Vietnam at a low level became fantastically escalated by LBJ, who became president upon his demise on board Air Force One with the blood of Jack Kennedy still on Jacqueline's clothes. He spilled an ocean of blood in Vietnam, which was formative for me. I was demonstrating against that war from the age of 14. The attitude towards Lumumba, towards the Congo, was indeed very different to that which followed. But let's, for the purposes of this show, Jim, look at what might have been different in the Middle East if Kennedy had lived, had served a full second term. It is interesting that just before he was killed, Kennedy began to require the Israel lobby, which has gone on to fantastic levels of strength in your country, to register as foreign agents. That died with him, that idea. And the Israel lobby is now, I think, the most powerful domestic political lobby in your country, and it effectively represents the interests of a foreign state, but doesn't have to register as such. But what else might have been different?
Okay, that's one. All right, that was changed after his death. He wanted the the mother organization of IPAC to register as a foreign agent, which they mightily resisted. They were arguing with them about this until November of 1963. Then that was changed. But something that very few people know, and but you probably do because you know a lot about this. See, Kennedy was trying to develop a very close relationship with a guy named Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the leader of Egypt. All right. Now, for your younger viewers who don't know who Nasser was, it's it's inarguably he was the most popular, the most charismatic, the most magnetic Arab leader of that era. Some people would say probably of the century. All right. Kennedy looked at Nasser as a way of westernizing and modernizing the Middle East to get it away, from Islamic fundamentalism. All right. Because Nasser was a secularist. Okay, if you ever watched a guy, he always wore suits, beautifully combed hair and everything, Brooks Brothers shirt and tie, etc. He tried to develop a working relationship with Nasser. Another point, Kennedy was trying to push something called the Johnson Plan. There was a diplomat named Joseph Johnson who Kennedy asked him, I want you to formulate a right to return for the Palestinians from the Nakba of 1948. Now, what does that mean? Kennedy wanted to arrange through the United Nations that people who were displaced from the Nakba, okay, had a right to return to where they were. A, if they didn't want to do that, they could move elsewhere into the area. B, or C, they would get a cash award for what they lost so they could move anywhere that they wanted to. Now, this was very, very important. I don't think there's any question about this, okay? Because it would have given the Palestinians, you know, instead of living in refugee camps, which is about what 700,000 of them were doing at that time, the right to return to their homeland, all right, and given them proper property rights. You know, Kennedy argued about, up until the day he died, Kennedy was arguing with the Israelis about this. They kept on asking him, well, how many do you want us to take? And with Kennedy, there shouldn't have been a top limit. Okay. And that's what he was arguing with them about. All right. Now, the third point is Dimona. All right. I'm sure your listeners, you know, that Dimona is the atomic reactor in the Negev desert. All right. Which the Israelis would always tell Kennedy, you know, this is for peacetime purposes, for atomic energy, you know, for electricity, et cetera, things like that. Well, the French who had helped him on this, started filing reports to the State Department that no, this is not for peacetime. They're building an atomic reactor there to build an atomic bomb. And so when Kennedy got about 3 or 4 of these reports, he began to challenge the Israelis on this. He goes, are you or are you not building an atomic weapon there? All right, because you know the way I feel about nuclear nonproliferation. I don't want anybody else to have these terrible weapons, especially some places volatile as the Middle East. And they would all deny it. And so Kennedy came to the conclusion that this was an Israeli conspiracy to deceive him on this issue. So he demanded inspection rights to Dimona by the United States government. All right. And Ben-Gurion was a leader at that time. And Kennedy sent a letter, I think it's in the summer of 1963. You know, we want 2-a-year inspections of the whole entire reactor. All right. And if we don't, we will place all our funding for you in limbo. All right. And so Ben-Gurion wrote him back. And, you know, Ben-Gurion would always do this with Kennedy. He goes, you know, why don't you check on what Nasser's doing? Why are you always bugging us? You know, Nasser wants to eliminate Israel. He's a new Hitler, etc. Well, Kennedy has brushed that all aside, okay, and said, look, you heard what I said. We either get inspection rights twice a year or your funding is going to go into limbo. I will not tolerate an atomic war in the Middle East for any reason at all. All right. And so the day after he got that letter, Ben-Gurion resigned. He resigned. All right. And he had been the leader of Israel for like 13 years. Okay. And so, of course, this is another big change afterwards, that after Kennedy was assassinated, that whole thing went astray. Johnson didn't give 2 bits about whether or not Israel had an atomic weapon. And in fact, I'm sure you know that there's a very powerful case that can be made that the Israelis stole the uranium and the plutonium from a plant in the United States called NUMEC, which I believe is around the Pittsburgh area in Pennsylvania. And Jeff Morley, a writer in James Angleton, believes that they had the help of the CIA, specifically James Angleton, in stealing this enriched uranium, you know, from the United States. Everything changed once Kennedy was dead. Johnson was the most pro-Israeli president that Israel ever had up to that time. And
yeah, although there have been many competitors for that title ever since. So we've mentioned the Dulles brothers, the CIA by extension, Israel. There were others, Cuban emigres dissatisfied by Kennedy's lust for overthrowing the Cuban Revolution, organized crime, angry at Bobby Kennedy's war against the mob, the mafia. Who killed Jack Kennedy, Jim? Any of these or all of these?
Well, I believe that there was a kind of coalition, you know, of mutual interests, which you mentioned. all right, between the CIA, the Cuban exiles, and organized crime. I believe organized crime came in at the end to polish off Oswald so he wouldn't talk.
You don't think Israel, with its levels of marksmanship, might have had a role on that fateful day?
Well, I don't know about that, George. I've never seen any very strong evidence, of Israeli involvement in the actual assassination. So I can't state an opinion on that one way or the other.
I haven't seen any evidence either. But circumstantially, it seems to me that Israel had at least as much right to hate Jack Kennedy as any of all these other players clearly did. Jim, it's been fascinating talking to you. Your scholarship in this field is without peer, and the recognition that you have as a result of it is entirely justified and vindicated. Thanks for joining us on Have It Out
Okay,
with
you're welcome,
Galloway
George.
today. Let's go to the video wall to hear the audience's view on the opening part of the show or any other matter that concerns them. Let's go to North Dakota. Palmer Rising is on the line. Palmer, welcome. What would you like to say?
Well, first of all, if I may, Mr. Galloway, it's an honor for me to speak with you, and I am very impressed by your articulate eloquence, and I say that sincerely, and I learned quite a bit from you. I routinely look up words that you use to try to find out the meanings, and that's very good. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now, the question that I have is regarding the destruction of this country. I'm calling from the United States, of course, and there is an orchestrated and engineered invasion of this country. I suspect that some of the reasons behind that are to undermine and dilute any vestiges of a unified national character here, and to destroy national morale. Two, to skew the Electoral College toward bastions of left-wing voting, such as New York, California, and Minnesota. If you're familiar with the Electoral College in this country, there are a certain number of electoral votes, and they are based upon population, and they can be shifted around. So if they can overload certain areas, they can skew the Electoral College. And there's also, it's to overwhelm the welfare systems and to bring, I feel, social disorder and an increasing occurrence of just outrageous and appalling crimes. You can see video recordings of people just walking down the street and just being assaulted for no reason whatsoever. And also to deeply ensconce saboteur elements within this country for what I very strongly suspect will be a coming war. And here in North Dakota, I'm surrounded by nuclear missile silos, so I'm not exactly comfortable with that. But the question that I have for you, Mr. Galloway, is how do you feel about this? It is a literal invasion, and if one does not have if the people of a country do not have a say as to who comes into their country and who is their neighbors, how can we take a stance against the Israelis doing what they're doing in Gaza? Because now it's not a perfect analogy, but it's a similar situation here. We are being invaded almost. Granted, it's nowhere near as horrible as what's happening in Gaza. But what is your stance on the unfettered bringing in of immigrants into this country and yours?
Well, it's a good and very big question, Palmer. I won't be able to do it justice entirely. But before agreeing with you on one or two points, more than one or two, let me playfully, if I may, say that it's ironic to hear someone complaining about a literal foreign invasion of their country when your country is itself the result of a literal foreign invasion. I mean, why are you in America? Because your ancestors invaded it and massacred, annihilated the native people and took their land. Everybody in America, apart from any surviving Apaches and Comanches, is a foreign invader or the descendant of foreign invaders. So forgive me playfully pointing that out. I also think you're wrong in thinking that it is the foreigners who are coming that are your problem. The problem in America is not the foreigners who are coming, but the people who are ruling you and have been ruling you through all of these decades of decline. The destruction of America's moral character began at least on Elm Street in Dallas in November of 1963, as I've just been discussing. But it's been downhill all the way, Palmer, long before the literal foreign invasion. My third point is the United States has never done literally foreign invading other people's countries. And that is a part of your problem too. If you were not burning billions, trillions actually, of American taxpayers' money, it could be spending those billions, trillions, on dealing with the deep-seated social, political, economic, and infrastructural crises, multiple crises that span the virtual entirety of the United States of America. Where I agree with you is this, that a state is not a state unless it controls its borders. A state which has no border cannot meaningfully be described as a state. Now, as I've pointed out here many times, indeed last week most recently, I'm against mass immigration. I'm against mass immigration both because of the impact on the country to which the mass immigration has come, but also because of the effect on the countries from which the mass immigration has come. Because I want the Bolivian doctor to be attending to the medical needs of the people in Bolivia or any of the other Central or South American countries from which these foreigners to whom you refer are coming from. So I'm against mass immigration. I'm against so-called open borders. The only people who really want open borders are the big industrial and commercial interests that benefit from the mass supply of cheaper labor. I'm against these things. And my last point of agreement with you is that the only people who have a right to determine who comes into the United States are the people of the United States themselves. The people, if they had a Congress which put America first, instead of Israel first, instead of Ukraine first, instead of one puppet regime after another first, America would be in a very much healthier state. So thanks for your kind comments, Palmer, and I'm sorry I couldn't agree with you more fully. Let's go to England, to Berkshire, where Nick Smith is on the line. Nick, welcome.
And thank you, George, for allowing me on this show, and thank you very much to Charlie for inviting me on. George, a lot of our politicians are globalists. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yeah.
I think that the UK and the US spend far too much time talking about global issues rather than homeland issues. And I totally agree with you that Joe Biden spending billions and billions on foreign interests like Ukraine and Israel is wrong whilst his own country crumbles. Let's just look at states like the San Francisco and other places. They've crumbled. They're becoming a zombie state. So my question to you, George, is if you were to become prime minister of this great country, if your party were to be in power, would you want to send our money and our weapons to Gaza and Palestine, considering I think you were overwhelmingly elected based on policies around Gaza and Palestine? Would you want our money and our weapons to be sent to Gaza and Palestine, George?
Absolutely not. The very last thing that Israel-Palestine needs, that the Middle East needs, is more weapons or more war. My first action, if I become Prime Minister in a few months' time, will be to end all military cooperation with Israel. It will be to stop the supply of weapons and components of weapons, stop the use of the RAF. Our brave pilots have been sent on 200 overfly spy missions over Gaza, flying out of our sovereign base in Cyprus. I'd get rid of the sovereign base. There would be no overflights in Gaza. We would have no part in the war or wars that are raging in the Middle East. My principal foreign policy would be for peace, for automatic friendship with nobody and automatic enmity with nobody. And I certainly wouldn't allow other countries to determine who we were friends with and who we were enemies of. Thanks for that. Let's go to London. Potkin Azarmer is in London. Welcome, Potkin. What would you like to say?
Thanks for having me on your show, George. I've met you twice before. Once was in the House of Commons in a meeting in one of the committee rooms where you were going on about police brutality in the UK. And I reminded you that you worked for the Iranian regime, which have a much more brutal police force. And then you called the parliamentary police to come and arrest me. And another time was at the premiere of the House of Sands about the Saudi family, where you wouldn't go to the drinks reception there because they were serving alcoholic drinks. Whereas I agree with a lot of things you say, George, about what you just said about mass immigration was spot on. What you said about the Western interference and all these imposing walls that ruin the countries and create all this instability and all that. My problem is, George, is I would believe you a lot more and I could side with you a lot more if you didn't side with tyrants like the Iranian regime, for example, if you didn't work for them. And also, if you didn't try to appeal to everyone, like in Rochdale, you sent one letter to Muslims trying to appeal to them, saying that you don't drink alcohol and you don't eat pork and all that sort of thing. And another one to the non-Muslims that are just concentrating on mass immigration and Brexit and things like that. A lot of the things that you say make sense and you're very articulated. And I think on a personal level, I would actually get on well with you, and I could have
I'm sorry that I got you arrested on that night. I don't recall it, but I'm sorry that I did it and that we got off to such a bad start. First of all, I never said anything about pork in any letter to any voter in Rochdale. I did say I don't drink alcohol, but then you just confirmed that I have never drunk alcohol. What's wrong with saying that? I'm proud of the fact that all of my life, and my father before me, and my children after me, don't drink alcohol. Alcohol is a very dangerous drug, and I oppose it. You're welcome to toast me and shake your glass and drink as much as you like, but I'm entitled to say I don't. Thirdly, I don't work for any regime or any government. I don't even work for the British government. I'm in opposition to the British government. I'm paid by Parliament and by nobody else. So your statement was then, is now false. I don't work for any regime, and I never have worked for any regime. You see, you get too used to these kind of smears that they escape from your lips without even a moment's thought that if I knew your address, I could send my lawyers round, not to arrest you, but to slap a writ for defamation upon you. Now, you support Israel. You think Israel, I'm reading your original question, which was rather different from the one that you asked. You say Israel is the only country in the region which with democratically held elections, and that there hasn't been an election for 18 years in Gaza? Well, first of all, Israel doesn't hold democratic elections because there's millions of Palestinians who've been living under Israeli rule since 1967, before you were born, who've never once been allowed to cast a vote to elect a government in Israel. That's why we call it an apartheid state, because you're forced to live under its military jackboot from 1967 until 2024, and for however long it lasts, and you will never be allowed to cast a vote for the government of Israel. And secondly, there hasn't been an election since the last election in Gaza because the country you support has stopped any possibility of elections, either in Gaza or in the West Bank. So let me challenge you. Lift the siege on Gaza and have a democratic election. I promise you it won't go the way that you want. I promise you that. And I speak as someone who would never have voted for Hamas in the first place, but I promise you it will not go the way you think it will go. If you will agree that whoever the Palestinians vote for will be considered and respected as the elected government of the Palestinian people. And because I know that you will not, cannot agree to that proposition, I will treat your treaties with less than respect. The Palestinian leader, who is recognized by Israel, who is recognized by the so-called international community, is Mahmoud Abbas. But his presidency ran out 25 years ago. But nobody in Israel is demanding a new election in the West Bank and would not allow a new election on the West Bank, because that wouldn't go the way that you would like it to go either. Saida Yasmin in Chicago is up next. Saida, welcome.
Hi, Mr. Galloway.
Welcome from the Windy City. What would you like to say?
Hi. The question I originally sent to the group was about the elections. So I think, one is a dumpster fire and the other is a train wreck. Mm-hmm. So I am still conflicted, but if you are aware, one of the celebrities called Cardi B, she yesterday, or I think in the last week, she mentioned something which got me thinking. She said, I don't endorse no presidents anymore. 3 years from now or 2 years from now, quote, when one of these old hags is our president and some fudge shat happen, I don't want to feel guilty that I'm part of the pick. And I'm not encouraging anybody to not vote. So, yeah, now I think she endorses my opinion. So I am really conflicted.
Well,
so
I can well understand your lack of enthusiasm for voting for either a dumpster fire or a train wreck. I wouldn't do that either myself. The duopoly, the uni party, which rules your country and mine, does not deserve the single vote of any self-respecting person and should not get it. And the lower their vote, the better. So if you cannot find anyone who you think would be a half-decent president, then you shouldn't vote for anyone at all. You should not vote for the lesser of two evils. First of all, because that way evil always wins. And secondly, how do you tell which is the more evil between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I couldn't. I really couldn't. In fact, if you forced me, I'd have to say that Donald Trump would be less evil because, like a stopped clock, he might be right twice a day. But the Biden presidency, we already know to be a train wreck, to use your words. So you might as well try somebody different. But I would not vote for either Biden or Trump. I would vote for Dr. Jill Stein, who is on the ballot in many places in the election. She's the Green Party candidate. I happen to know her quite well, and she's on my mother of all talk shows on Wednesday evening. So I urge you to tune into that, ma'am, and you'll get a better picture, not just of her policies, her character, but her possibilities of scoring a significant vote and significantly affecting the outcome. Let me go to Beirut, Lebanon, Stefan Hampartzumian. Stefan, forgive me if I mispronounced your surname.
No, you pronounce it perfectly. Thank you for having me, George. Yes, I know it's a big name. It's 14 letters.
Very
All
good.
right. So, George, this is the issue. Okay, as a Lebanese Armenian, okay, my father was born on a warship, a French warship called Lavoisier, fleeing Turkish massacre, the genocide that Israel doesn't want to recognize, because even that the genocide, they want to have the exclusivity for it. Anyway, one of my questions is, I've been to Armenia trying to move there, and now I live in Lebanon. And I've just noticed that, and I would like your like to think about it. As I can see, is Armenia today in the Caucasus area, okay, the same like Lebanon is in the Middle East? Like, these two countries are very small countries, and they're being torn apart by all the neighbors all the time. And every time they move and they want to go left or right or towards the west, they get like beaten by either the Russian or the Israelis or the Syrians in Lebanon. They're very alike, these two countries.
Well, I think the best place, Stefan, for you right now is in Lebanon. It certainly wouldn't be in Armenia, which has a government that has betrayed the real interests of the Armenian people, selling the country to the Americans. It certainly wouldn't be in the Azerbaijani territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, because that has been ethnically cleansed and taken back by the Azeri government. The other places that you mentioned have historically not been safe places for the Armenians. The Turkish genocide against the Armenians has still not even been acknowledged, never mind atoned for. So in the great melting pot in Lebanon, you have found a place, you have found a home with the Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Sunni, Shia. You are a treasured part of that community, as I know well. And by the looks of things, Stefan, you're sitting pretty in that lovely garden of yours. Thanks very much for that call today. Last call, I think. Hussein in London. Go ahead, Hussein. What would you like to talk about?
George, I wanted to bring back the subject matter to the fact that we're talking about JFK and who he was and what happened to him and who was responsible. So I've posted into the chat of this Zoom call a theory that's been put in place by a guy called Ryan Dawson, and it's called NUMEC, How Israel Stole the Bomb. And what I'll say to you is that during the 1940s all the way up to 1970, there was an operation called Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird was the American intelligence services basically infiltrating the media and deciding what's the best thing to talk about to support the CIA and its projects. If you watch that, and I can't remember the name of the person who you brought on about JFK, who didn't blame anything or didn't think anything to do with Israel. I think if he looks at that documentary that's been made called NUMEC, How Israel Bomb Was Stolen, basically, he will see the exact lines, names, and every single person that's involved in it. And I look at everything that's come out since that time as a distraction. So Roger Stone, is it the film director, made a film called JFK.
Oliver Stone. Roger Stone's a very different man altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Oliver Stone made a movie, a 3 hours and 20-minute movie, and that movie did not have the name of Israel in it in any way, shape, or form. Everything's always been directed away from the Israeli state. I'm telling you, from everything that I've looked at, not only did they have a hand, they had a major hand. The AIPAC was instructed by JFK to register as a foreign agent. And a few days after that request was given to, or that order was given to them, JFK dies. Lyndon Baines Johnson does not follow up on the orders to get them to AIPAC to be registered as a foreign agent. There are so many things that just goes to show that the hand of Israel is directly involved with what happened to JFK. And I urge everyone to watch this documentary that's been made with so much data information at George. It may be, it behooves me to tell you anything, but it may be an idea for you to watch it on a big screen so you can see the pictures and the names of the people who are involved in it. JFK was not someone that was murdered by the mafia or this, that, and the other. He was murdered under the instruction of the Israeli state. That's my personal opinion from everything that I've watched to do with JFK. And every day is a learning experience for me. And every day with more information that comes out, that's what I truly believe. I believe that he was murdered because of his opposition to and because he supported the Palestinian people and their right to exist as normal human beings. And anyone who stood up for the Palestinian people throughout time, like Jeremy Corbyn, like you, become in the crosshair and the target of the Israeli state. So that's my opinion on it, and it's not a small opinion. It's a completely consistent.
Yeah, I haven't seen the film. I haven't seen the film to which you refer, but I definitely will look for it and watch it. I did make the point to our guest that Israel would appear to have, objectively, at least as many reasons to hate Kennedy as any of the other more regularly cited parties to a conspiracy, and rather more actually than most. And as subsequent events have proved, they're quite adept at assassinations. So it may very well be true that they were a part of the package, but I have not myself seen any evidence of that. And even our guest, when I put it to him, was very clear that he himself had seen no such evidence either. But there is no doubt that Israel illicitly obtained nuclear weapons. The 1980s revelation that Israel had at Dimona more than 200 nuclear warheads, undeclared, subject to no inspection by the IAEA, completely out with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel's obtaining of the nuclear bomb was itself a conspiracy involving the CIA, involving French intelligence, and involving British intelligence. There's no doubt at all about that. Now, Kennedy might have put a stop to all of that. He certainly would have been inclined to do so. So I don't think the issues of Israel and the murder of JFK are separate issues at all. And I'm grateful to you for bringing that up. Okay, I've only got 2 minutes, but I don't want to be said to have failed to call somebody who hates me. I love it. I'm a masochist. James Bembridge in London. Fire away, James. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
Once upon a time, in the noughties, Mr. Galloway, you raised monies for the Miriam Appeal, a campaign you founded to help a young Iraqi girl with leukemia. Is fundraising for your UK political party based on the fatal threat to children in Gaza or on the problems faced by children in your constituency? And will you be as transparently accounted for that?
Will it be transparently accounted for? What a poisonous individual you are. My efforts to save a little girl in the 1990s would appear not to have much to do with my political party in 2024 and is egregiously, gratuitously raised by you to cast some kind of pall over my political activities. Luckily, I've only got a minute to answer you because it can be answered very briefly. We don't have any funds. Our political party is self-funded. It's funded by our members and by nobody else. It has no donors. It has no funds that could meaningfully be called funds other than the membership fees of the fastest growing political party in Britain. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. As to transparency, as a registered political party, our fundraising is accounted for at the Electoral Commission, appointed by the British government. And so our accounts are forensically examined by them. As I say, a poisonous individual, a poisonous final question, but evidence at least that if you are hard enough, you can come and have a go with me, George Galloway. Thank you for watching. If you want to join the studio audience, then write to us at www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com.